Okay, welcome everyone. Might be a few more people signing in, but we'll get started since it's 8 o'clock. Thanks everyone for joining. We're happy to be presenting this topic today for all of you with a great panel here. So Kathie, I'm going to ask if you want to introduce yourself first, just a brief introduction, and then we'll go into more detail later, and then I'll have the parent panels. Oh, Kathie, you're muted. Sorry.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Kathie Kobler. I'm an advanced practice nurse, and I've had the privilege of working with families for over 35 years, caring for them in a hospital setting. Helped to start our bereavement program, our palliative program, and now I work with women when they're hearing news during pregnancy that their baby will need medical care. So I'm also a mom who's experienced 3 pregnancy losses and has subsequent pregnancies with that. So I also bring that part of my experience to the discussion, and I'm very grateful to be with you all today.
Thanks, Kathie. We're happy to have you. Lynette, would you like to do an introduction?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Lynette Elam. I am a mother of 3 boys, my son, Andy, Zach, and my new little guy, Jamie. My first son, Andy, was born unbeknownst to me at the time. I had a very typical pregnancy, and we got the shock of our lives when he was born. And as soon as he was born, we could tell that there was some medical issues, and he had a very severe form of Marfan syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. And he passed away when he was 3. He was the love of our lives, and we miss him dearly. And I'm very happy to talk about this subject matter, which I think is very important today. So thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity to share my story.
Thank you, Lynette. And Hannah?
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Hannah Skirmerhorn. Like Lynette, I'm also a mom of 3 boys. Gabriel is 12 years old. He was born in 2008. Sage, my middle, my forever angel baby, was born in 2016. And Luke River was born in August of 2020. Sage was born also kind of similarly to Lynette, with a very rare and devastating medical situation that we didn't know about until he was born. He was born with a cerebral AVM, which caused massive brain damage to his left hemisphere. And over the course of his short life, caused damage to both his brainstem and his right hemisphere as well. He died in 2016, and this topic is very, very near and dear to my heart because of the fact that we did go on to have another child unexpectedly. And it's been a huge blessing to our life, but it also carries quite a bit of complexity. And I look forward to talking about it more.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you all for being here. Jennifer, are we ready for the video?
The hospital where I had my second daughter was the same hospital. It's a small hospital where Emerson died. And so that was the hospital where she got most of her treatment and where she actually did die. And so I was really nervous about being in that hospital. I'd been in there as a volunteer and as some other roles, but being in there in a medical setting felt really different. And I think that my OB's office was not in there, but I think that one thing that was hard was I had such high anxiety about something going wrong. And I wasn't high risk for anything to go wrong. And I did feel a little bit like that wasn't fully understood. I think that all mothers, all pregnant women are worried to some extent. But I think when you've already had a very rare, very unexpected, almost unheard of tragedy happen with your child and losing your child, even the things that are minuscule and or the chances of them happening are minuscule. I think we've already covered this, but those things, to me, it was like, yeah, those things could happen. Any of it could happen. And so I was really worried about being in that space. And I think that I don't think that was fully understood. I went to the hospital at one point where we thought we were having a complication. It turned out to be okay late in the pregnancy. And one of the people that interacted with me then didn't know us. And I think she saw in my chart something about having had a child die. And so then she said, oh, I think she said, how far along were you or something? And I said, oh, well, she was 16 months old. And she was a little taken aback because I think something had been mentioned about me having a loss. And I don't know if she thought that was a loss before birth or after. So she was a little bit taken aback. And I said, I think maybe they were talking about why I was at the hospital for this particular issue that wasn't a very big deal, but I was so panicked. And she said something like, oh, you'll be fine, just keep your head about you. And I think it was meant to calm my fears and to be like, everything's fine. But to me, it felt really like diminishing what to me were really real fears. When your child has died, anything's possible.
We're going to start off the discussion tonight with Kathie, just responding to that video and adding some conversation about how parents can advocate for themselves and work within their medical community with some of these complex feelings and needs in pregnancy after loss.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm just so grateful to Sarah and the words she said. That part, anything's possible when you've had a child die, is definitely what the families that I've had the privilege of caring for over the years have taught me well. And I think, so I by no means claim to be an expert in any of this, but will share with you what we've learned from working with other families here. And I think to begin, it's this acknowledgement that you are, when you've experienced the death of a beloved child, you have work that's ongoing that you all know very well with your mind, with your heart, and you carry that with you, and your experiences from every aspect of your past life come with you into your current experiences. So, I think about all the times working with parents who have said, sometimes it's just so hard that I have to be the one to tell the people that are supposed to be helping take care of me what we need. But that really, I think you'll hear that reflected in the stories today of just as Sarah had to speak out and say, this is my situation, when things feel out of control and uncertain, especially with hearing the news of a pregnancy, planning for a pregnancy, and whether the story of loss was years of infertility beforehand, or pregnancy loss, or the death of an older child, being able to decide when and how you want to share that information with the team that's going to be caring for you through your pregnancy journey will be important. I've met families who have said, I cannot go back to the providers. They were great, but the ones that were with me with my first experience, I can't go back there. I need to start fresh. So in those situations, and especially in those first visits, OBs or maternal fetal medicine specialists, they're getting histories and looking at losses from the perspective of pregnancy. So if it's an older child, you may have to be able to forthright tell that part of your story as you're willing to share. And again, I've had parents say, I don't want to say anything. I want to go into this, my first visits, not sharing a lot, but it could be something as simple as, Our family's been through a lot. I'm not ready to tell you the full story yet, but at some point I'm going to have important things to share with you about my family, about how I'm going to be experiencing this pregnancy that I really want to be sure that my team pays attention to or can hear. Because often in those first pregnancy visits, especially, there's a lot going on. And there may be a busyness to an obstetrician or an MFM office that doesn't afford itself to the time and space a parent may need who's had a previous loss and is grieving to be able to share. So making and holding space for that. If you have a healthcare professional that you're working with who knows your story, that's a great starting place. And I think you've learned through your journey with loving and grieving and missing your child who's died, how to give voice to what you need. And I would say being able to do that with the OB team or the MFM team who's going to journey with you during your pregnancy. And then remembering that when it comes time to deliver, you may be meeting a whole new set of team members. So again, there's that option of a choice: when and how much of your short story do you wish to share and when, right? So thinking about what you're going to need in the moments as they meet you during your pregnancy, making sure you can vocalize. I just talked with the family on Monday. Our team was with them, and the mother was able to say, this is the trauma that we experienced before, and we need you to know about it. We're not ready to talk about all the details, but we're anticipating that some of this is going to come up at some point during our pregnancy journey. And our whole team paused and said, when you're ready, we'll be able to receive that. And as you feel comfortable, we would be more than willing to pass it on to the team that is actually going to be with you when you're in labor, when you're in delivery, when you're in postpartum. So finding those trusted people on your journey that you can share that with. I've had parents sometimes say it's too hard to maybe say the words, especially in the rush of a busy appointment. So sometimes they'll write it out to their team. And we can talk later about what it might mean to create a birth plan. Those are excellent tools that many labor and delivery settings are very familiar with. We write delivery plans for all sorts of reasons. But I've had families who are experiencing a subsequent pregnancy that really wanted to be sure the team knew certain things. Because the reality is, as Sarah so clearly said, right, that there's a heightened, you've learned so much about with your journey for the child who you're loving and missing, who has died, and you carry all of that. You can't get rid of it. It's a beautiful part of who you are now. And so as those normal pregnancy concerns come up, and what I've also learned with working with so many pregnant women is no two pregnancies are the same for a mother, for a father. Physically, they're different. Emotionally, they're different. And so going through that work, that journey together, and being able to voice as feelings meet you, to be able to name and claim, this is what it is right now, and who do I need to share this with? Who can help me? What do I need to do for myself in that moment will be important. And you will find people to listen to you. It just may be it coming from your initiative, because I think team members really want to be able to validate. And sometimes we do say things that aren't helpful. There may even be things in the words that I'm saying. I've learned that more than once, that sometimes we're trying to convey as healthcare professionals and it comes off not hitting people in a way that was not helpful. And to be able to speak up and say, thank you for saying that to me, maybe not even thank you. I heard what you said, I'm receiving what you said, and you know what, that wasn't helpful to me right now, and this is why. I think teams welcome that kind of thing, especially if you have physical symptoms that you're worried about. Or maybe I didn't feel my baby move. I'm concerned during pregnancy. Like, always reach out and share those things. Our team will always say, if you need to, have checks, then call us, text us, whatever you need to help your level of comfort is what you should be able to work out during your pregnancy. Another hint I can offer is, if you'll be delivering, as Sarah was talking about, in the hospital where your child died, I've learned from other families that it's important maybe if they're not ready to come into the hospital yet, to do the drive there again, if that's not the place where they're going for their prenatal visits, to do that drive perhaps to recognize and know. I had one mother say, can you just meet me at the door, Kathie? Can we just walk me to labor and delivery and help me to, because we're in a very big hospital. I need to just see that it's a little bit different than the path I walked the whole, all those weeks and months with my son. I said, okay, we can do that. Some parents, if their loss was during pregnancy, getting to that point in their pregnancy where up until when all the challenges started for them, may be a very concerning time for them, or actually coming into labor and delivery may bring flashes back or memories. And I think for all parents, no matter the age of the child that's died, going through labor again and remember, you won't know what those points are till they meet you, but to think through what you might need to do for yourself to prepare. For some parents, it's being able to tour, to walk that space ahead of time, to just see it. That should be another choice that's available to you. Sometimes a little bit challenging in COVID, but another thing to think about. And I guess I've also learned that our teams are really interested in knowing what will help parents feel comfortable, feel grounded as they do the work of connecting with their new baby and starting to develop their relationship and continue to honor the child that they're loving and missing who's died. And so there's so many different opportunities for that. I've seen parents have special objects with them that belong to the child who they love and miss. I had one couple that invited me in. They were subsequently pregnant, into the delivery room, and the father said, show her your toenails. And she pulled back the sheet, and she had beautifully painted green toenails. And I said, they're green. And the mother nodded, and I said that was her favorite color, because it was the favorite color of her daughter who had died. And I said, boy, they're so beautifully painted. How did you do that? And the father said, oh, that was me. I did that. And so how they created and did something special together. She said, because I know we'll be looking at my feet at some point, and I just needed that connecting point to remind me of and feel my daughter close. So something as simple as painting your toenails or finding those ways to honor moments as they meet you. I've had parents write letters or keep a journal as they've gone through their pregnancy as a way of connecting to their feelings, to their thoughts, to their relationship with all of their children. I'm very interested and have done some writing and thinking about ritual. And sometimes when we hear ritual, we think of very formal ways, but ritual can also be that very human part of us that wants to honor and acknowledge when important things are happening to us. And I've seen families do very creative, beautiful things as they're welcoming new life to their family, and also honoring the child that they're loving and missing. And so perhaps we can talk more about that on the call, but I guess all my thoughts are to say, one, I'm very grateful to be here, and the journey that families go on with subsequent pregnancies is amazing work, and teams really do want to listen. I know sometimes we fall short, and that often the responsibility falls on the families to be able to say, this is what I need, this is what's important. But I can also say, and I'll just share this lastly and quickly, my husband is the oldest of 7 boys, but he also had a sister who was a year older than him, who died when she was 7 and he was 6. And all the ways that I marvel at what his parents did, because her death was in the 60s, but all the ways her parents or his parents wove Peggy's story into their family, so that the subsequent children who came knew her and knew about her, and that even now all her nieces and nephews and grandchildren, everyone knows about her, that there's so many beautiful ways that families can, over a lifetime, welcome their subsequent children and continue to honor the children that they're loving and missing.
Thank you, Kathie. I would like to open up some conversation with Hannah and Lynette now. And I think, for me, I would like to start a little bit more at the beginning of sort of how you both decided to choose to have another child, and how, after you got pregnant, how that introduction of your pregnancy went, both like within your family and within your medical providers. And Lynette, I'd like to start with you, and if you could just also explain a little bit more of like the timeline of your son's births, and share that with the group.
So my son Andy was born in September 11th in 2016. And, we were in and out of the hospital. He was in the NICU for a week and a half, and then many hospitalizations thereafter. But for a long stretch there, we were not in the hospital, and all signs pointed to that he was doing quite well. And so my husband and I, our baseline at that point was very manageable, and we had a lot of support at home. So we decided to get pregnant again with my second son, Zachary. I was blessed in that, we didn't have any issues getting pregnant. And so Zach was born in July 2018. And so he and Andy were 22 months apart. And, Zach was born into a family where he was the youngest between the two boys. And my husband and I, we've always said that we had wanted 3 children. And so we always had thought that we were going to have a third. We didn't know exactly when. And, I think it was December 2018. So right before Zach was born, Andy started getting, his baseline just started to shift. And there was, he was readmitted to the hospital. He had a very terrible bout of RSV that really shifted his baseline. And after that illness, he was placed on hospice. That was in February 2019. And he ultimately passed away in October 2019. And we were just, even though we knew it was coming, and everyone kept saying, he is terminally ill, I think we just kept holding out hope that it wasn't going to happen. And he had just surprised us every other time that he'd been hospitalized and pulled through. So I think that, it was just incredibly traumatic that last week of his life, and just thinking that he was going to pull through. And then ultimately he passed away on October 22nd, 2019, a month and some days after his 3rd birthday. And I think for us, it was very difficult in that, we were grappling with just profound grief and just feeling incredibly empty, but also having, I think Zach was 15 months old at the time that Andy died, and completely dependent and like not really aware of what is going on. And so, in some ways it was good that it forced us to get out of bed and care for him, but it was challenging. So when we decided to have our 3rd child, I think that it was not really like well calculated, if I'm being honest. It was more of just like we had decided that we were going to start trying in January of 2020 when Andy was still alive. Like that was just our timeline. And I think even though things had drastically shifted and things did not go to plan, in that our beloved son had passed away, I think just almost as a matter of like survival, we just kind of kept on with our plan. And so we did get pregnant very quickly after, only, 3 months after Andy had passed away. And again, I was fortunate in that I got pregnant right away when I started trying. But it was very challenging for me, because I think that I did actually with that with my pregnancy with Zachary, I did not tell anybody that I was pregnant until I got all testing done, because all of the tests that at least they're able to test for, I got done. And so I was literally like bulging out of my pants, and my mom was like, kind of like giving me the once over, until I didn't tell anybody, except for, obviously my husband, and my closest friend. And then in this third pregnancy, I don't know. I think part of my grief, like I was almost like, well, the worst thing that could possibly happen to me has already happened to me. So why not just share that I'm pregnant this time around? So I was more vocal about it. But I still just, it's this weird like paradigm of going through, this pregnancy, which is all measured by your weeks. And I became so obsessed with, the date of the 22nd, which is like the date that my son passed away. And I just always would honor him on those days, and felt like I needed to do something to honor him. And it's just weird, having this pregnancy, which like literally you're getting further along and closer to the due date. And, that's juxtaposed with being away from my son who, had passed away. So, it's welcoming new life all the while you're missing this cherished life. So it's very complex. That was my experience and the timing.
Thank you, Lynette. Hannah, I know you mentioned that your pregnancy with Luke was a bit unexpected. So I wondered if you could talk about how being reintroduced into the medical side of things in maternity, and how what was helpful for you in those early conversations with your OB, and sharing your history.
Sure. My situation was very kind of, it was unique from the get-go. I think just to kind of back up a tiny bit, our son died of an AVM that had genetic roots. And when we were in the hospital, when our son was still receiving care, his neurointerventional radiologist told us about this genetic mutation, something to look into when our son had kind of gotten through the more acute phase of what was happening to him. When Sage died, that gene was just kind of burned into my brain. And I was scared of getting pregnant, actually. My husband and I were terrified of it. So we took steps to begin researching what the gene was, what the mutation was. And we discovered that it was in our family. So for the first few, probably 2 years, it took a long time to get the testing because the mutation is so rare. There was only one laboratory that would even sequence. So it took about 2 years to even get information for my family and for my oldest son, Gabriel, also to make sure all of us were safe. So that dominated so much of our grieving and so much of our journey, that when we did finally have some answers, we were told that IVF was really the safest way to conceive, because the mutation was so rare and so devastating that we were advised against natural conception. So we did begin the pursuit of IVF, and ultimately decided that it wasn't for us. It was not something my body could handle or go through. So when we found ourselves expecting in December of 2019, we were completely unprepared. I didn't have an OBGYN. I didn't have a medical team, and my husband and I didn't know what to do. My husband and I were just kind of a two-person team. We don't have family. We don't have kind of an extended support group, and for the sake of our oldest son, who has autism, we did need to have a certain level of concrete knowledge about what was happening. So we called our neurointerventional radiologist from Boston Children's Hospital and asked him what to do. And he he helped us. He referred us to a doctor at Brigham that he actually does some research with and co-treats. She's like the head of the MFM practice, but she specializes in brain abnormalities and AVMs. So she became our doctor. And it was a very serious situation at first. We were not kind of greeted with a lighthearted pregnancy. The first half of our pregnancy, I would say, was very, very serious. We were told that there was a 50% chance that we could have a child with the same condition as Sage, and we were advised to terminate if that was the case. So the first half of the pregnancy was guarded and very, very serious. The team did know about our situation because luckily the doctor that referred us had explained Sage's condition. I actually think she knew about us before we became her patient. So there was a pre-established knowledge of our son and our medical history. So we didn't have to explain too much. But the trauma and the urgency were present, and our doctor knew that, which is why she was able to speak very, very clearly to us about what needed to happen, and we were able to receive that. So yeah, almost 20 weeks. The first 20 weeks of the pregnancy were very heavy and very frightening, and I, quite frankly, was very detached from it. My oldest son found out that we were pregnant before we wanted to tell him, and he was very, very anxious. So there was a lot of management, more so. But underneath that, I was very, very conscious of fostering as much love and safety within myself as possible to try and make it through what was happening. Because either way, we were preparing for something. We were either going to prepare to have another child, or we were going to be preparing to have a loss, which both of those were, there was a lot kind of encapsulated in the experience. And obviously we've been blessed and our son was healthy and is healthy. But it was a very medicalized experience for sure.
Thank you. I think you touched upon a lot of the things that we wanted to talk about tonight. And I just want to say, both of you have a unique understanding of the things that can go wrong. And after experiencing the diagnosis of your children, it's hard to not think that way and to not worry about things in a way that, like Sarah said in the video, is different than a typical pregnancy. Yes, we all worry, but you have this unique experience of an added layer of that. I wonder how you managed that for yourself, and if there were resources or strategies that you use to help cope with, those worries and fears while also trying to hold hope and joy and the new feelings of this pregnancy.
I can speak about my own experience, and that I think that for me, it was helpful that I had my second son, Zachary, while Andy was still alive, because I knew it was possible that I could have a child that was healthy. And so I do think that at least for this third pregnancy, which is the pregnancy I had after Andy had passed away, I at least had that knowledge that, it's not always the case that I'm going to give birth to a child that has this, life-limiting, and a terminal diagnosis. So I think that was very helpful. I am always tell a straight shooter, and because my son from opening the gate, we were just 26 doctors at Children's, every therapy you could possibly imagine. I just really got into the whole medical thing. I would always joke that I had a second degree in nursing and being a doctor after caring for him. And so I really did learn how to kind of advocate for myself. And so with my medical team, kind of what with Kathie was saying, like I did opt to, not because I had any, bad experience with the personalities that I was dealing with. I was in a very large hospital, and I'm grateful that I was there, because I'm not sure if I had been in a small setting, maybe they wouldn't have picked up on my son's clinical diagnosis at the time he was born. But I did kind of get like I wanted to have a clean slate in my second pregnancy, and I went the same OB for my third pregnancy as well, which is a very local practice in my suburban town. And I also opted to deliver at a different hospital, which is a very local, much smaller facility. And I was very upfront with the medical people that I was dealing with, and just saying, my son died and I want to be clear about that. And I was oftentimes like the educator, which was frustrating at times, but I also have learned in this journey that, it's unfortunately as parents where I often found myself was, being my own advocate, advocating for my child. So I took all those tools that I had gathered as a parent of a medically complex child and applied it, advocating for myself. And I did it in my own pregnancies. In my situation, my son's was also a genetic diagnosis, and it was a spontaneous mutation. And so both my husband and I had been tested, and neither of us do carry the gene, but there is still this concept of mosaicism where it potentially could, be in a germ line. I learned all this stuff. So we did want to at least test for those things. So in both of my subsequent pregnancies after Andy was born, I did opt to get a CVS in both cases, the chorionic villi sampling. And so, that was scary. And I, of course, thought, the statistics that they say, oh, it's only like 1 in, 4,000 cases where something happens. I would always say, well, I've already been like the 1 in 200,000 where something like that happens. So statistics really don't help me, because I've always already been in that 1% shoe. But I think for at least my own story, those testings did at least put my mind at ease, even though I always, would be a little bit pessimistic about it, say, well, like the tests can only test for what they can test. Like they can't test for everything. But I at least had in my back pocket that neither of my subsequent children had any of those diagnoses that at least could be tested for. So that helped me a bit, but I still was definitely anxious.
For me, I found a lot of solace in being quiet and being as present with everything that I was feeling as possible. To kind of echo what Lynette said, we've been in that scenario of defying the odds in the worst way. And when you have that kind of extremely traumatic, ingrained experience of trauma and loss, after being told things by doctors and by teams, and having your child do the opposite, and eventually die, your own experience. And I do think that doctors sometimes can get a little bit too stuck into like the numbers and the data, when that's really, it's just not the human experience, and it's not really what the heart knows and what the spirit knows. And I think as a mother in particular, my son was 3 months old when he died. So that whole kind of the first 3 months of his life were just chaos. And it did kind of get burned into my body in a way. I found that being as honest with my emotions as possible when I was ready to do so. Like Lynette, I also had a CVS performed. Painful, extremely painful. It shocked me how painful it was. But once we got the results, we were not necessarily out of the woods, because AVMs don't grow detectably until the 3rd trimester. So we were still being monitored very, very frequently. having scans done to see if there was any kind of abnormality in the brain vessels. So I had to just kind of be present with all of it. And when we got the results from the CVS, that absolutely did take a good amount of the anxiety away, but then it left space to kind of have everything else flood in. The kind of twofold happy sadness, the concern about the future, knowing how you're going to be a mom again, because you're a different mother. You know, you're a different human. When your child dies, you just become a different being altogether. You know, so there's a lot of, at least for me, there was a lot of self-doubt, and learning how to trust my own body was very, very difficult, because for me, it was a genetic condition that I passed on. So I think that there was just a level of having to learn to love the baby that you're carrying and learn to find as much solace in what you are being given and the care that you're receiving. And you forge ahead, right? Because that's really what life is after your child dies. It's just an endless series of forges forward and pushing forward towards growth and healing, and hopefully, you know, towards our children who are beyond. But I think the practice of being utterly present and open and advocating for yourself as much as possible, I think those really are key. And if your feelings change, then they change, and you discuss those too, and it's okay, I think, to have a various number of different feelings that shift over the course of a pregnancy, because it's natural. And as the baby grows and moves, and you have these new kind of milestones, you have different feelings that register with it. And in a similar fashion, like, you can't really know what your child's death is going to be like. You can't really know what having a new baby is going to feel like after your beloved child dies. But I think it's just cultivating trust in yourself and your body, and learning to just find love for the new thing that's coming, because that's hope.
Thank you, Hannah. I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions, or, you know, if you feel comfortable just unmuting and asking a question, raise your hand and we can unmute. You can also use the chat, but we have a fairly, you know, small group here, and I know these moms and Kathie are here to kind of talk to you about what's going on with you. So if there's anybody who has questions, please feel free. And we can talk about them. And if not, oh, Blythe, do you have a question? Oh.
Well, I will, of course, go. So this is, I think, in some ways it's for all of them, all of you, Lynette and Hannah and Kathie. First of all, thank you so much, a lot. I'm curious as to whether it's possible for, or appropriate for, providers who are seeing, is there a way to get out ahead to anticipate what parents might be feeling? Or is the burden on the parent, particularly the mother, to say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm going, I need help. Like Kathie, you talked about how the parents said, like, they told you, and maybe that's just the way it is. And,
So,
you know, we're very good at advocating, but like, what do you think?
Sure, it's a great question, Blythe, and I'll start responding with that. And I was thinking about, as Lynette and Hannah were sharing too, I hope I didn't by no means come across saying that the burden is all on parents, right? It's jointly owned. Those teams that are receiving new moms need to have that in them to be able to ask and explore, help me to know what else is going on in your life or what things are most important to you about your care, giving those open-ended questions to ask about them. I think the challenge for subsequent pregnancies, if it's an older child who died, meaning not a death during pregnancy, it's not going to necessarily be reflected in the medical record at all. And even then, we always, as I teach and talk to different teams too, I remind them, whenever you look at a pregnancy history, there's ways that medical teams call GRAVA and PARA, and there's numbers about how many times you've been pregnant and losses or whatever. There's so many rich stories and feelings and experiences behind those numbers. You need to ask. And if in the rush of those first appointments, or especially if it's a situation where teams hear a little bit of information about the child who died, or that there's even something genetic going on that the family's experienced, OBs and MFMs are going to go in their diagnostic mood, groove, and kind of do that. We're going to do this and do that and do that, and to remember how the ownership really is on healthcare professionals to pause and say, how is everything I just offered to you? What thoughts might you have? Building those points. And I think one of the most important things I learned from bereavement work and palliative work is also to stop talking and to build in those pausing points. And for parents to carry that skill too, I'm sure you learned that as you were journeying with your children. This is like time out. Like I've got too much of being absorbed to me. So I think the team somehow need to hear whatever part of the story. If it's not coming through the pregnancy record, they need some information to make that background. And in both, as Hannah as you spoke to, and Lynette, the testing that you had, making the choice even for that testing, and when sometimes there's time parameters, but is this something we want to do right now? Or if we do it, are we ready to receive the information? Like there's always points of choices. Am I ready to take in new information? And if we're not asking, teams need to be reminded. And if in the context of a busy OB or MFM appointment may not always be optimal, then teams need to pause and make the space for that. We work with wonderful social workers, chaplains, other people sometimes nurses that will hear bits and pieces of stories as parents are able to share them if they're not ready yet. And then as a team, we're talking about it and saying, what should we be pausing? What should we be asking more about? But it's a delicate balance. And I really appreciate both Lynette and Hannah, how you said, you're feeling whatever you feel in that day, in that moment. Sometimes just coming to the appointment and checking in is an accomplishment based on everything that's happened. And there have been times where we thought we had a lot set up that we were going to talk about that day, and we had to stop ourselves because we had one mom say, I'm just too sad today. You could talk to me, but I'm not going to hear you. So it goes both ways, but we definitely need as healthcare professionals to be better at asking those open-ended or drawing out questions.
And I would like to also just add that, at least in my experience, like I had a very, as pleasant, I guess, as possible experience with my OB's office. But on the day of my son's birth, my son Jamie, there was just like a massive disconnect between, everything that I felt like I had been preparing myself to have, as easy as possible birthing experience. But then it was a completely different labor and delivery team. And I don't think I mentioned this in terms of my timing, but my son Jamie was actually born on September 10th. So it was like the day before my son Andy's birthday. And I was like losing my mind. I was screaming for Andy, and it was just like that was very traumatic for me, because I felt like they weren't listening to me and no one knew my story. And I was literally in labor. So I felt like I had to be like literally very vocal, like screaming at them. And so that just like, if there was any way to preemptively, put me in this hospital system, and for any fellow bereaved, parent and mother to be in the system so that when there is that transition from the OB visits to the hospital, because it is oftentimes a completely different set of care professionals, to have that set up, I personally would have benefited from that greatly, because, you know, it was just unfortunate that I felt my birthing experience was traumatic in and of itself. And, you know, the timing was a huge factor of that. And until I literally begged this nurse, you know, my son died and his birthday is tomorrow, and this is his first birthday, like, of him not being here, like, please listen to me. I don't think that should have happened. And I thought I had done everything to kind of set it up so that wouldn't happen. So I don't really know what the answer is, but I would love to have had that resource available. So if there's anything that this platform can help facilitate that, I think that would be tremendous for future parents going through something like this.
I'd like to add too, I think there definitely can be improvement. To kind of speak to Blythe's question, I do think there can be some kind of preemptive attachment to the process of receiving medical care. I asked for help from my doctor once I got to the point in my pregnancy where I felt like things were stable, you know, past that kind of 20-week mark. And my doctor, who's incredibly skilled and, you know, she's a brilliant physician, admitted that she didn't really have all of the tools to kind of cover the emotional, the anxiety, the traumatic side of what my needs were. So I asked if they had a social worker, and I was connected with one who was wonderful. But I do think that if there is in the medical records some kind of statement, some kind of information or data that does show that there has been a previous loss, I think kind of off the bat, some kind of social work or therapist or psychological kind of reinforcement, like an added layer, should be enfolded into the care of an expectant mother or family or couple. I think it's just, I mean, we all know that type of support creates a better experience, a more holistic experience, and it hopefully ensures that the health kind of continues, even if there is something traumatic that may happen. Because in my experience, the OBGYN was not, she dealt with brain AVMs. You know what I mean? Like that was her specialty, and she did not have the ability or the tools to talk to me about my son's death or just my concern. So I think having a social work piece or another kind of person that can be connected. I think unfortunately the state of things is that women who are pregnant do have to ask, and I think that is it's a complicated situation because you're vulnerable for a number of reasons, but kind of like, you know, the point of this whole conversation, I do think that in the future, having a practice that includes a mental health piece, to speak back to even what Sarah talked about, anxiety is a natural part of pregnancy, but I do think having some kind of therapy aspect that can kind of help with the anxiety piece and the uncertainty piece, and like Lynette said, the transition into actual labor, because that is a different experience, because we know we may not always have the same doctor who delivers. You know, when I had Luke, there were multiple rounds of physicians coming in, and in my specific situation, Sage, my son who passed, his condition was in all of my medical records with Luke. So everything was, you had a child deceased at 3 months, cerebral AVM or intracranial AVM, you know, so that was always a part of my third pregnancy, and the conversation was always going. So I think having some kind of mental health piece for bereaved women, I think, is crucial. And I think it also goes on to potentially protect the health of this baby, the babies that are being born, you know, because I do think that we can transfer emotions and other things to our children. So it's quite possible that the baby that's about to be born might be an inheritor of things that bereaved women don't want our children to inherit. You know, and I think as an OBGYN, I think that it's just forward thinking to include a mental health piece, because we also know too, like Kathie said, many women do experience loss, and not just of a child, but in pregnancy. And just showing up sometimes is a ton of work mentally.
And I'll add to what both Lynette and Hannah so wisely shared. We're talking a lot about during pregnancy, but then the same types of connections need to happen with the pediatrician or the teams of doctors that are going to be taking care of the baby who's born. And then just those ongoing milestones then as the baby grows, having connections to those resources and making sure that the stories are being carried along and that parents have a way to articulate, this is how we like to receive information. This is why we may have more questions for you, whatever that may be. From my own experience, I know I was grieving the losses that I experienced during my pregnancy. It wasn't until I was holding those subsequent babies and home with them that I just re-grieved the enormity of the losses that had gone before, and holding and welcoming this new life. And just, you know, those were moments that were really tender, and I was going through all the emotions and the physical aspects of having delivered. So grieving on top of being postpartum has its own challenges to it. And again, to be able to know where those resources are to optimize your mental and your physical well-being are really important across your child's care trajectory and your care trajectory as well.
There's a few comments in the chat. Michelle, you know, recognizing that she also is feeling some of these things about carrying the story and explaining it to new providers. Jennifer just mentioning that genetic counseling can help kind of bridge some of those conversations and engage in some of the emotional support as well. And Angie Anderson is asking, would some sort of short ceremony or time out that honors the child you lost on the day or night of delivery be helpful? So kind of going again back to that ritual piece of how do we really honor this in a way that's intentional? I wondered, Kathie, if you wanted.
Sure. And I think definitely if that's something that would be meaningful, to build that in. And I really wonder sometimes how many parents are quietly doing that once they're after their baby's born, or finding a way to do that, that healthcare professionals aren't even seeing in those moments surrounding birth. But again, ritual is really, especially those informal ones that rise out of your heart, a way to pause, acknowledge, mark, signify. It can be done with words or simple actions. I think the header slides that were running before this call opened up, there were words from a parent that said, when I wrapped my new baby in my son's blanket, it was this. So those special connecting points too. So most definitely, and there are many people that could help with that, or resources for that if you're interested, or just creatively thinking in your heart, this is what I need to do in the moment. Sometimes you don't know until that moment, which again is why it's so important that we help build pathways and tools for families during subsequent pregnancies after loss, not only to support them during that pregnancy, but when that whole new team meets them in labor and delivery, and then they're following home and connecting with the pediatrician and the living and growing that happens together during that.
Thank you, Kathie. I know we're just about out of time. One last question just came in from Rachel asking about coping with grief postpartum. I think we've talked a little bit about holding that grief while in the pregnancy. Obviously the postpartum piece, I'm sure, is different for everybody as well. I don't know if either of you moms want to share a little bit on that, and just maybe also how you connect all of your children together.
I can speak about that. I know for me, just in the uniqueness of having my son Jamie be born on September 10th, a day before his brother's birthday on September 11th, I was just kind of a disaster on the next day. And in the days of COVID, I was like in the hospital for less than 24 hours. So I was home very quickly. And, I did lean heavily on my partner, my husband, to kind of have a little ritual, to honor my son. And I was doing some journaling. And so that was unique to that day, but that was like very acute postpartum, experiencing tremendous grief in that very, the day after I gave birth. And honestly, like connecting with CPN actually has been tremendously helpful for me. I was able to connect with Hannah, and she and I have actually become friends through this, kind of little club that we're in, that no one wants to be a part of, but I've just been able to find some really beautiful people through this, unique life experience that we've all shared. So that's been like incredibly helpful for me, is connecting with other bereaved parents. I also did, even before I lost my son, Andy, I had been seeing a grief counselor on a biweekly basis, just helping me with my anticipatory grief. And I continue to see her now, less so. It's now like on a monthly basis, but definitely through those first few weeks postpartum, I would have virtual visits with her and just be holding my newborn baby, and just to have that space to talk about what I was feeling. Those are just, it's certainly like, if you're anything like me, the postpartum period is just a rush of hormones and you're not sleeping. And so everything is just like amplified times a million. So it was just a lot of crying and getting through it. But so it's challenging. And I would just talk to my son, Jamie, and I continue to do that. We're very inclusive, about Andy. Just to answer the second part of your question, Carrie, we talk about him all the time, much to like my toddlers, like sometimes he's like moved on and I'm like, no, what about, Andy? And he's like, not paying attention to me anymore. But we talk about him. We show pictures to the boys of him. Jamie was actually named after him. My son, Andy, his full name was Anderson James. And so we named my son James. We call him Jamie, but we did name him after Andy. And we go on walks with the kids. Andy was a huge lover of birds. We go on this walk that we would always go to. We did get we're walking distance from the cemetery where his headstone is, and we take the kids there frequently. So we definitely integrate Andy all the time into our lives. And even though Zach was only 15 months when he passed away, he talks about him freely. And it's beautiful that I can tell he knows that Andy's a part of our life. So, and we'll continue to do that, like, because I am a mom to 3 kids, and, I do see them as all brothers. So we'll continue to keep him part of our lives.
Do you want me to answer real quick? I can probably 1 minute. I do think postpartum is very difficult, and I think, postpartum is it's an extremely delicate and kind of sacred period of time. I know for me that when Sage was approaching death, I tried to store as many memories of him being alive as possible inside of myself, because I knew it was fleeting. And I found myself doing the same thing with Luke after he was born. I found myself really trying to like physically force myself to try and be like as aware of the feelings of holding him and breastfeeding him. And every single moment I was really trying to like force in. And I think I've recognized that that's kind of a new after effect of grief, wanting to feel him so much that I actually am stopping the process of like the natural bonding. And I think it's fear. And I think, like Lynette said, the hormones do rage, and you do have postpartum, and then you have grief. And so it's like everything is magnified. And I think that that's just something that bereaved parents also have to deal with. Everything is harder, everything, like paying bills, going grocery shopping. So having another baby is beautiful, and it's life-changing, and it is fulfilling in a way that not really anything else is, but it is very difficult. And I do find that I sometimes anticipate I'm going to still lose him, and I try to remember things, and I think it's more so about experiencing now. And it's just been an interesting kind of conversation and relationship with myself as a mom and as a human, to let Luke in and to let myself back in, and to be proud of the children that I've made. You know, it's a very complicated situation, and not really something for this meeting, but my oldest son, he needs a lot of time and explanation. So Sage's life and death are always a conversation in our house. And I look forward to there being less fear and anxiety in those conversations, as Luke demonstrates that not all babies die and not all kids die. I think it's just going to take time, but having postpartum resources, whether they're friends, family, partners, like Lynette said, having a therapeutic support that's already in place, I think is really, really, really beneficial, and kind of anticipate that grief is going to complicate things. So you want to kind of stock up on your emotional tools to kind of navigate the things that will bring comfort, and will help you just be as in peace and in love as possible, because I think it's really important to remember that we deserve that. We deserve to be in love with our children, and we deserve to be in love with life, even though, you know, that's not really the case with bereavement. So doing whatever you need to know yourself and your situation, and be easy with yourself and be forgiving of others. And I think those are probably the things that I've learned. So.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here and sharing your stories. And I'm sure there's a wide range of people in the audience who are anticipating this, maybe in the middle of it, or have had children since, and maybe some providers as well, learning from you all. So I really appreciate it. For everyone who's joined tonight, we'll send up a follow-up email with some additional CPN resources and some other information about this topic and other topics in the future. Thank you all for being here tonight. Have a good night.